Most home batteries share three weaknesses their owners never think about. They can catch fire, they lose much of their charging ability once the cold sets in, and running them flat does real damage. A Cambridge company says none of that has to be true. Its answer is to build the battery around sodium rather than lithium, drawing on the same element that gives seawater its salt. The firm behind it, 11 Energy, takes its name from sodium's place at number 11 on the periodic table, and its sodium battery is already running in homes across the UK. It starts as a single 4.5 kilowatt-hour pack and stacks up to around 33 inside a weatherproof outdoor enclosure. Match lithium on the things that matter, and sodium leaves behind the cobalt, the nickel, and the fragile supply chains that have trailed batteries for years. So we are going to pull one of these packs apart, follow exactly how salt holds a charge, and weigh up whether this really is where home energy storage is heading. The home battery market has a dependency problem, and it starts deep in the supply chain. Almost every storage battery sold today runs on lithium, usually a lithium iron phosphate cell. The materials behind it come from a narrow and strained set of sources. Lithium itself is often pulled from brine in water-stressed regions, where extraction can drain millions of gallons from fragile local ecosystems. Higher performance cells add nickel and cobalt in particular carries a long record of dangerous, exploitative mining. Nickel extraction is heavily carbon intensive on top of that. None of those three materials is abundant, and all of them tie home storage to supply chains that are concentrated in just a handful of countries. Then there is the way lithium behaves once it is installed. The cells are sensitive to temperature, and the cold is where that bites hardest. As the electrolyte thickens near freezing, the battery struggles to take a charge. Force one anyway, and you can plate metallic lithium onto the internals and cause permanent damage. To stop that, outdoor batteries in cold climates often run small, built-in heaters, which quietly spend some of the energy the battery is meant to be saving. The colder it gets, the more of your stored power goes to simply keeping the battery warm enough to work. There is also the fire risk, because a damaged or faulty lithium cell can enter thermal runaway and burn fiercely. For a battery that increasingly hangs on the garage wall of a house, those are real liabilities, and they are exactly the ones 11 Energy set out to design away. The company is based in Cambridge, England, and was incorporated in 2024. It was built by a team drawn from battery technology and the UK renewables trade. One of its founders, Andy Rankin, also started Midsummer Energy, a large British solar distributor. That connection gives the young firm a ready route into installers across the country. Their bet is that home storage does not need lithium at all, and that a much more common element can do the job. That element is sodium, and the chemistry works in a way that will sound familiar. A sodium ion cell shuttles ions back and forth between two electrodes as it charges and discharges. It is the same basic rocking chair motion a lithium cell uses. The difference is what is doing the shuttling. Sodium is roughly 1,000 times more abundant than lithium, and you can pull it from soda ash or straight from seawater. That takes the whole cobalt and nickel question off the table. That swap changes the cell's character in three useful ways. The first is safety. 11's sodium chemistry is far more resistant to catching fire, and the company states there is no thermal runaway or fire risk in normal use. That is the single biggest reassurance for a battery bolted to the side of a house. The second is cold tolerance. The sodium pack is rated to charge and run from -4 to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. Lithium home batteries usually charge only between 32 and 104 degrees, so the sodium cell keeps working through frosts that would leave a lithium unit throttled back and leaning on a heater. The third is how hard you can push it. A lithium cell is damaged if it sits empty for long, but a sodium cell can be run all the way down to 0 volts and held there safely. That makes the battery simpler to ship, store, and live with. A lithium pack has to travel partly charged under strict rules, while a sodium pack can be sent at 0 volts with none of that hazard. It also means more of the rated capacity is genuinely usable, rather than holding a buffer in reserve to protect the cells. Around the cells, 11 has built a complete system rather than just a battery. Each 4.5 kilowatt-hour pack sits in an IP65 outdoor rated enclosure, so it can go in a garage, a shed, or straight onto an exterior wall. You start with one and add more as you need them, up to 8 packs on a single inverter for around 33 kilowatt-hours of storage. Because sodium cells run across a different voltage range than lithium, a standard inverter would read them poorly. so 11 designed its own hybrid inverters to match. These tie the solar panels, the battery, and the grid into one unit, and they switch over to backup power in milliseconds if the grid drops. Running the whole thing is an in-house smart energy platform. It learns the home's patterns, charges the battery from cheap overnight tariffs like Agile Octopus, and times the discharge for expensive peak hours. It also talks to the rest of the house through smart sensors. From there, it can route surplus solar into a water heater, watch a heat pump's draw, or stop the home battery quietly emptying itself into an EV charging on the driveway. All of that raises the obvious question of how it stacks up against the lithium battery it wants to replace. The honest answer is that it gives up one thing to gain the rest. The thing it gives up is energy density. A sodium cell holds less energy for its size and weight than a lithium iron phosphate cell, so a sodium battery of the same capacity is bulkier and heavier. A single 11 pack weighs around 120 pounds for its 4.5 kilowatt hours. In a phone or a long-range car, that penalty would be a deal breaker. Bolted to a wall, where nothing has to carry it around, it mostly stops mattering. The trade buys back the safety, the cold tolerance, and the cleaner materials. Where sodium pulls level, or ahead, is in how long it lasts. 11 guarantees its battery for 8,000 cycles across a 10-year warranty, and promises it will still hold at least 75% of its capacity at the end of that term. Premium lithium home batteries are often warranted to a lower retained capacity over the same period, so on paper, the sodium pack is built to outlive them. The company has said its cells have run past 13,000 cycles in lab testing. That figure is its own, and the real proof will come from years of units running in the field. There is a cheaper option below all of this, which is simply not having a battery and buying all your power from the grid. But that leaves you exporting your solar for a pittance by day and buying it back at peak rates by night. That is the exact gap any home battery exists to close. The reason a sodium battery is landing in the UK right now comes down to two trends arriving at once. The first is solar. British homes are fitting rooftop panels at a record pace, with installations running into the hundreds of thousands a year, and the total fleet now well past 1 million homes. Every one of those roofs makes most of its power in the middle of the day, when the people inside are usually out. Without storage, that energy gets sold back to the grid cheaply and bought back expensively after dark. The second is heating and the way people now pay for power. The shift to electric heat pumps is adding large, predictable loads to homes in the evenings. Dynamic tariffs are spreading fast too, charging different prices through the day. A battery that can fill up when power is cheap or the sun is high, then run the house through the costly evening peak, turns both of those trends from a problem into a saving. That is the job 11's platform is built around, and it is why the timing works. For all that promise, sodium storage has real ground to cover before it becomes a common sight on British walls. The first hurdle is that the headline saving has not arrived yet. Sodium's raw materials are far cheaper than lithium's, but the cells are still made in relatively small volumes. Lithium production, by contrast, is a vast and finely tuned global industry. So at the checkout, an 11 system currently costs a little more per kilowatt hour than a premium lithium one, not less. The cost advantage everyone expects from sodium only appears once production scales up. For now, 11 cells are made in China, which leaves the price exposed to shipping and tariffs until domestic manufacturing arrives. What would settle it is volume, and the company is betting the demand will pull that through. Then there is the simple fact of how new this is. 11 Energy is barely off the ground, with only a few years of trading behind it and its products still ramping into the market. There were on the order of 100 of its batteries installed in the UK in late 2025. That is a promising start, but a tiny base next to lithium's millions. A long warranty is reassuring, but a warranty is only as solid as the company standing behind it. That track record can only be built 1 year at a time. The density gap is the third open question, less a deal breaker than a limit. A sodium system simply needs more wall space and bears more weight for the same storage. A home tight on room, or with a wall that cannot take the load, may still find lithium the easier fit. Closing that gap depends on the chemistry improving. And across the wider industry, sodium's energy density is climbing steadily toward where lithium iron phosphate sits today. Even with those caveats, the direction here is set, and 11 has built more of a foundation than most startups its age. Its batteries are already shipping through a national installer network, backed by one of the UK's largest solar distributors. The company is also an approved partner on Octopus Energy's smart tariffs, so the software hooks into the cheap power windows automatically. The roadmap points outward from the home. 11 has signaled larger commercial-scale systems and bigger inverters to follow, which would carry the same chemistry into businesses and community projects. It is also exploring building cells in the UK rather than importing them. That is the move that would finally turn sodium's cheap raw materials into a cheaper finished product. None of that is guaranteed, and it leans on the company scaling successfully, but the pieces are pointed the same way. What 11 Energy is really testing is whether the home battery has to be built on lithium at all, or whether a far more common element can carry the load with fewer of the costs and risks. Run flat without harm, shrug off the cold, refuse to catch fire. A sodium battery starts to look less like a compromise and more like the right fit for a box that lives on the side of a house. The packs are still bulkier, the company is still young, and the deep cost savings are still a few years of scale away. But with safer chemistry, a longer guarantee, and the materials problem largely solved, sodium has earned its place in the conversation. The early units are already proving it on real roofs. If you want to keep up with the technology reshaping how we power our homes, subscribe and follow along, because we will keep digging into what comes next.